They said Apache girl was too wild. Lonely rancher just gave her a horse and watched her ride. The sun hung low over the small town at the edge of the desert, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The townspeople were busy preparing for the evening, sweeping the sidewalks, stacking crates of fruit outside the little market, and calling to one another across the wooden porches. It was a quiet town, the kind where everyone knew each other's business, where even a small act of bravery or mischief could become the talk of the town within hours. Among the residents lived a girl who had always stood apart, not because she wanted to, but because she was different. Her name was Naya, though most people simply called her the Apache girl. It wasn't a name she had chosen, and it wasn't meant kindly. The townspeople whispered about her whenever she passed. They said she was too wild, too daring, too untamed to fit into the calm rhythm of their little town. But Naya never minded the whispers. She had grown used to them over the years. From a young age, Naya had loved the open land more than anything else. She had been born on the outskirts of town, where the flat plains met rolling hills and the desert stretched endlessly. While other children stayed close to the dusty streets and the small schoolhouse, Naya wandered. She climbed rocky hills, followed the winding trails of wild animals, and spent hours sitting under the wide sky, listening to the wind. Her family had moved frequently when she was little, so she had learned to rely on herself for adventure, friendship, and fun. Nature had been her teacher, her playmate, and her only companion. But it wasn't just her love of the outdoors that set her apart. Naya had a spirit that refused to be contained. She ran faster than the boys in her school, climbed trees taller than anyone else dared, and laughed louder than seemed proper. She spoke her mind and did not follow the many unwritten rules that the townspeople expected from girls her age. It was this fearless energy, her unwillingness to bow to the small-town expectations, that earned her the title of Wild. Many people tried to warn her. "Naya, you shouldn't climb that cliff alone," said Mrs. Grayson, the schoolteacher, when she caught the girl balancing on a rocky ledge.
"It's dangerous. I can handle it," Naya replied simply, without fear, and she usually could.
Even other children, though secretly in awe of her, sometimes avoided her. They whispered to each other about how reckless she was, how trouble seemed to follow her wherever she went. They did not understand that Naya thrived on challenges, and that danger, in small doses, did not scare her. It excited her. Her love for horses was perhaps her most defining trait. She had grown up around them, watching the ranchers in town care for their animals, admiring the way the horses moved with grace and strength. But Naya had never owned one of her own. She would sneak into the fields at the edge of town to watch the ranch horses run free, imagining that one day she would ride one as fast and as wild as the wind itself. For now, she contented herself with learning all she could from afar, memorizing the ways the animals shifted their weight, pranced, or responded to gentle commands. Despite the whispers and judgment, Naya remained unbothered most of the time. But even the strongest spirits feel moments of loneliness. There were times she wished someone would understand her, someone who would see that her wildness was not something to be feared, but something rare and beautiful. She longed for a companion, a friend, or even a mentor who would not tell her to sit still or stay quiet, but who would let her grow, explore, and challenge herself. The townspeople, of course, were blind to her needs. They saw only the surface, the messy hair, the scratched knees, the bold laughter that carried across the streets. They shook their heads when they saw her scaling a rocky ridge or sprinting through the dusty trails. "That girl is too wild," they would say. "She will never settle down. She is trouble waiting to happen." And so Naya became accustomed to being judged and misunderstood, a shadow walking among the quiet, careful lives of others. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Naya wandered farther than she had ever dared before. She climbed the hill just outside the town's limits, the one that gave her a view of everything she loved. The desert stretching endlessly to the horizon, the clustered rooftops of her town, and the winding river that glinted like silver in the fading light. She loved these moments when she could breathe freely, when she could feel the wind whip her hair around her face, and when the world felt entirely hers. It was on this hill, that she first noticed the rancher. Tom, as the few who knew him called him, had been living quietly in the hills for years. He was a man of few words, keeping to himself after his family had moved away, leaving him with only the ranch and the open land as companions. Tom had watched Naya over time, noticing her wild ways, her fearless climbs, her care for animals, and her determination to live freely. He did not call her wild. To him she was spirited, full of life, and daring in ways that reminded him of a younger self he had long left behind. That evening Tom was mending a fence on his property when he noticed the girl balancing on the rocky ridge above. He paused, leaning on his hammer, and watched silently. She looked like she belonged there, perfectly at ease with the steep rocks and the swirling wind. There was no hesitation in her movements, only confidence. Yet he could see that she lacked something. A companion, a horse to match her spirit. As Naya finally climbed down from the ridge, brushing the dirt from her jeans and laughing at her own small stumble, Tom approached her quietly. "Evening," he said simply. His voice was calm, not questioning, not judging, just there. Naya looked up, startled. Most adults in town would have scolded her, warned her of the dangers, or told her to be careful. But not Tom. There was no judgment in his voice. There was only recognition of the spirit he saw in her. "Evening," Naya replied, her voice cautious but curious. "You've got courage," Tom said, nodding toward the ridge. "Not many would climb that hill like it's nothing." Naya smiled faintly. "I like it up there," she said. "It's quiet, and I can breathe." Tom studied her for a moment. He knew the town had whispered about her, about how reckless she was, how no one could tame her. But he also knew something the others didn't. Naya's wildness was not chaos. It was strength, curiosity, and freedom combined. He felt a sudden thought form in his mind. A question, or maybe a plan. Could this girl, with all her daring and courage, be the one to connect with the one thing he had left that needed care? A horse, gentle yet spirited, who needed someone brave. As the sun disappeared behind the distant hills, Naya and Tom stood in quiet understanding. Neither spoke much more that evening, but something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of potential, of spirit, and of the possibility that wildness could be a gift, not a flaw. For Naya, that evening marked a subtle shift. She didn't yet know what it would bring, only that she had met someone who seemed to see her for who she truly was. And for Tom, it was the beginning of an idea that perhaps the Apache girl, who was too wild for the town, was exactly the person who could give purpose to a horse waiting for the right rider. As she walked home under the pale glow of twilight, Naya felt a thrill she had not felt in a long time. Perhaps, she thought, being wild wasn't such a lonely thing after all. Perhaps someone out there might understand. And so, the story of Naya, the Apache girl, and her untamed spirit began, not with judgment, not with scolding, but with recognition, curiosity, and the quiet possibility of a bond that could change both her life and the life of someone else. The next morning Naya woke early, as she often did, before the sun had fully risen. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold, and the desert air was cool against her skin. She wandered outside her small home, stretching and listening to the sounds of birds stirring in the trees. Even though she had grown up on the outskirts of town, mornings like this felt fresh and full of possibilities. But today something felt different. Her encounter with Tom the night before lingered in her mind, and a small spark of curiosity pushed at her heart. She didn't know it yet, but Tom had been thinking about her as well. After watching her climb that ridge the evening before, he had returned to his ranch with a thought that wouldn't leave him alone. Tom had a horse named Shadow, a beautiful animal with a sleek black coat that shone even in dim light. Shadow had once belonged to a young rider who had moved away years ago. Since then, Shadow had lived quietly on the ranch, grazing in the fields and enjoying freedom, but without purpose. Tom had tried to train him, but Shadow was spirited, strong, and needed someone with courage to truly connect with him. Tom had seen many people try. They were either too cautious or too timid. But Naya, she was different. Something about her reminded him of the wind itself, unpredictable, free, and untamed. He thought, perhaps for the first time in many years, that Shadow might find the right partner in her. And maybe, just maybe, Naya could find the freedom and companionship she had been longing for. By mid-morning, Naya found herself walking along the dusty trail that led to Tom's ranch. She wasn't sure why she was going there. The curiosity in her heart was stronger than caution. As she approached, she noticed the ranch stretched across a wide area. The fences in good condition, the fields green with grazing horses. Tom stood near the barn, his hands resting on a fence rail as if waiting for her. He greeted her simply, with a nod and a small smile. "Good morning, Naya," he said. His voice was calm, carrying a quiet warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Tom," she replied, unsure why she felt both nervous and excited. Tom studied her for a moment before speaking again. "I wanted to show you something," he said. "It's a horse. I think he's been waiting for the right rider for a long time." Naya's heart leapt. She had never owned a horse, and the idea of being trusted with one both thrilled and scared her. Horses were beautiful, strong, and unpredictable creatures. She had watched them from afar all her life, but this was real. Tom led her to a large paddock at the far end of the ranch, and there, standing in the morning sun, was Shadow. His black coat gleamed, and his eyes, dark and intelligent, watched her approach with calm curiosity. Naya's breath caught in her chest. Shadow was magnificent. Not just beautiful, but alive in a way that made her feel like she could almost hear his heartbeat through the air. "He's gentle if you respect him," Tom said quietly. "But he can be stubborn and strong-willed. He's not a horse for someone who hesitates or doubts themselves."
"I think you might be able to handle him."
Naya looked at Shadow, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out to touch his nose. The horse lowered his head and nuzzled her fingers, soft and deliberate. For a moment, time seemed to stop. She had felt many things in her life: joy, fear, excitement, but never this connection. It was as if Shadow recognized her wild spirit and trusted it immediately.
"He likes you," Tom said, noticing her reaction. "I think he's been waiting for someone like you."
Naya's eyes lit up with excitement and determination. Can I ride him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom hesitated. Shadow had not been ridden in years, and he knew the responsibility of trusting Naya with him. But at the same time, he sensed that Naya needed this, perhaps as much as Shadow did. "Yes," he said finally. "But we will go slowly. First, you need to get to know him, learn his ways. You cannot rush trust." For the next hour, Naya stayed by Shadow's side, brushing his coat, talking softly, and feeding him small pieces of apple that Tom had brought along. She learned to read his ears, his tail, and his movements. Every small signal mattered. Shadow responded to her patience and care with quiet acceptance, and Naya began to feel a sense of pride and connection she had never experienced before. Tom watched silently from a distance, letting her take the lead. He knew that the bond between a rider and a horse could not be forced. It had to grow naturally, and he could already see that Naya had something special, a fearless yet gentle heart that could earn Shadow's trust. As the sun climbed higher, Tom finally brought out the saddle. Naya's hands shook slightly as she lifted it and placed it carefully on Shadow's back. She had helped saddle horses before, but never her own, never one that belonged to her. Shadow shifted slightly beneath her touch, but did not resist. "Remember," Tom said, "he will feel your fear as much as your confidence. Stay calm. Be patient. Let him respond to you." Naya nodded, her heart pounding with excitement. She adjusted the stirrups and climbed carefully into the saddle. At first, Shadow moved slowly, testing her balance. But she stayed calm, following Tom's advice, letting him feel her energy without trying to force him. Minutes passed, then longer. Naya learned to communicate with Shadow using her legs, her hands, her voice, and even her breathing. Every movement mattered. She realized that riding was not just about controlling a horse. It was about understanding and partnership. Shadow was not her tool. He was her companion. And slowly, she felt him responding to her, listening to her, trusting her. By mid-afternoon, Naya was riding Shadow across the wide fields, learning his strengths, his fears, and his joy. The wind rushed past her face as they moved together, a wild yet graceful dance of trust and freedom. For the first time, she felt completely alive, completely understood. The townspeople's whispers, the judgment, the loneliness, they all faded in the face of this connection. Tom followed at a distance, watching her with quiet pride. He had not interfered once, letting her find her rhythm, her courage, and her voice with Shadow. He realized that giving Naya the horse was not just about training Shadow. It was about giving her a chance to shine, to grow, and to discover the strength she had always carried within her. As the afternoon sun began to sink, Naya led Shadow back toward the barn. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, and her eyes sparkled with triumph. "He's amazing," she whispered to Tom, her voice full of awe. "I've never felt anything like this." Tom smiled, a rare expression that softened the lines of his face. "He chose you," he said simply, "and you chose him. That's what matters." From that day forward, Naya spent every possible moment with Shadow. She learned his moods, his habits, and his ways. She rode him across fields, through rivers, and along winding trails, each ride teaching her more about trust, patience, and courage. And with each ride, she felt a sense of freedom and connection that she had never known before. The town began to notice. At first, it was only whispers, then curious glances, and eventually admiration. People saw the Apache girl, once called too wild, riding gracefully across the fields, a bond of trust and understanding visible in every movement. They began to understand that her spirit was not reckless. It was courageous, determined, and alive. And Naya, once isolated and misunderstood, finally felt what she had been longing for all her life: a companion who matched her spirit, a mentor who believed in her, and a freedom that could not be measured or constrained. Shadow was not just a horse. He was a mirror of her soul, a friend, and a partner in adventure. And Tom, the quiet rancher who had given her the chance, finally found purpose in watching her grow, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary things happen when someone believes in a spirit others cannot yet see. By evening, Naya and Shadow stood at the top of a hill overlooking the town, the sun casting golden light over the fields. She leaned down and stroked Shadow's neck, whispering words of thanks and affection. Shadow nuzzled her gently, as if to say he understood. And in that quiet moment, Naya felt a sense of belonging she had never known. For the first time, the wildness that others had feared was no longer something to hide. It was something to embrace, celebrate, and share with the world. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter. Naya had found her companion, her freedom, and a sense of purpose. And for Tom, it marked the joy of witnessing a spirit he had recognized long ago finally flourish. Together, girl and horse, rider and companion, they were ready to face whatever adventures lay ahead. The days that followed marked a turning point in Naya's life. Now that she had Shadow, she felt a joy she had never known before. Every morning she would wake with the sun, her heart beating fast at the thought of riding. She learned more about Shadow with each passing day, the way he shifted his weight, the way he responded to the softest pressure of her legs, the subtle signals of his moods. Riding was no longer just an activity, it had become a partnership. At first, some rides were difficult. Shadow was strong and at times stubborn. He would hesitate at uneven ground or decide that a small hill was too steep, testing her balance and patience. Naya learned quickly that riding was not about forcing him to obey, but about understanding him, guiding him gently, and building trust. Every time she succeeded, even in small ways, she felt a surge of confidence. The wild energy inside her was now matched by a controlled courage, a quiet strength that made her fearless but thoughtful. The town, meanwhile, was starting to notice changes in her. At first it was only a few curious glances from the windows of the market, or whispers as she rode past on Shadow. "There she goes," someone would say. "The Apache girl. She's riding like she knows what she's doing." Others were skeptical. It's just luck, they murmured. She can't handle a real horse for long. But luck had nothing to do with it. Naya's skill grew with each ride. She could guide Shadow across the rocky hills, through narrow trails, and even along the riverbank where the water rushed fast. She learned to anticipate his movements, to feel his hesitation, and to encourage him with soft words and gentle pressure. The partnership between them became something almost magical. Naya was no longer a girl simply riding a horse. She had become a rider, confident, strong, and in tune with her companion. Tom watched silently from a distance during these rides. He had suggested ways at first, guiding her through the basics of control, posture, and safety. But now he realized that she no longer needed his direction. She had learned, through courage, patience, and respect for Shadow, to become a natural rider. He felt a quiet pride, not just in her skill, but in her spirit. The girl who the town called too wild was now showing the strength, grace, and wisdom that many adults lacked. One morning, Naya decided to explore a trail she had never taken before. The path led through a dense section of the forest near the edge of the desert. Shadows from the trees danced on the ground, and the sunlight streamed through the leaves in golden beams. She felt a thrill as Shadow moved confidently beneath her. The trail was narrow and uneven, but she trusted him, and he trusted her. Every step they took together strengthened the bond between rider and horse. As they moved deeper into the forest, she noticed a small clearing where wildflowers grew in abundance. She stopped Shadow and dismounted, letting him graze while she walked among the flowers. It was moments like this that reminded her of why she loved the open land so much: the freedom, the beauty, and the peace that existed away from the judging eyes of the town. Shadow nuzzled her gently as she returned to him, as if he understood that this was her special moment too. Word of Naya's rides began to spread throughout the town. Children who had once avoided her now followed her at a safe distance, watching with wide eyes as she guided Shadow with skill and ease. "Wow," one of them whispered to his friend. "She's amazing. She's not reckless at all." The adults, too, could not ignore her anymore. Some still murmured about her wild past, but others began to admire her courage, patience, and control. Naya was slowly earning respect, not by asking for it, but by showing what she could do. One afternoon, a small group of children approached her at the edge of the field. "Can you teach us to ride?" one of them asked timidly. Naya smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart. She had once wished for someone to guide her when she was learning, and now she could share what she had learned. "Of course," she said, her voice gentle but confident. She spent the next hour showing them the basics: how to approach a horse, how to stay calm, and how to feel the horse's movements. The children listened carefully, their admiration growing with each lesson. Riding became more than just an activity for Naya. It became a way to connect with others, to share her love for horses, and to inspire courage in those around her. Shadow, ever patient, became the perfect partner. He was strong when she needed support, gentle when she needed care, and spirited when she needed excitement. Together, they became a symbol of freedom, trust, and partnership in the town. But not every day was easy. One afternoon, as she guided Shadow along a steep ridge, a sudden gust of wind startled him. Shadow bolted for a few steps, testing Naya's balance. She felt her heart race, but she remembered Tom's advice. "Stay calm, let him respond, and trust in your bond." She held on, whispered softly to him, and gently guided him back to the trail. The moment passed, and Shadow slowed, nuzzling her as if to apologize. Naya laughed softly, her relief mingled with pride. She had faced fear and handled it with courage. These experiences taught her important lessons, not just about riding, but about life. She learned that fear was natural, but it could be managed with patience and trust. She learned that strength was not only in daring feats, but also in quiet understanding and partnership. And she learned that respect, both for others and for oneself, could be earned through actions, not words. Tom continued to watch, silently amazed at her progress. He realized that Naya had grown in ways that went far beyond riding. She had transformed from the girl the town whispered about into someone whose presence commanded admiration and respect. She was still wild, yes, but in a way that was beautiful and inspiring, not reckless or dangerous. He felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had played a small role in helping her discover this side of herself.
One day, Naya decided to take Shadow on a longer ride across the hills that bordered the desert.
The trail was challenging, with uneven rocks, narrow paths, and sudden drops. But she felt ready. As they moved together, she felt a sense of exhilaration, a freedom she had never known. The wind rushed past her face. Shadow's hooves pounded the earth in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the world seemed to expand around them. She was no longer just a girl riding a horse. She was part of the land, part of the wind, and part of the wild beauty that surrounded her. When she returned to the ranch, the townspeople had gathered at a distance, watching with awe. They had heard of her rides, of her courage, and of her growing bond with Shadow. Some of them clapped quietly as she rode past, others nodded in silent admiration. Naya realized with a small smile that she had earned their respect, not by changing who she was, but by embracing it fully. Tom stood near the barn, watching her dismount. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. "I knew you could do it, but even I am surprised at how far you've grown." Naya looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for trusting me, and for giving me a chance." Tom smiled, a rare, gentle expression. "You didn't need me to believe in you," he said. "You believed in yourself. I just gave you the opportunity." From that day on, Naya and Shadow became inseparable. She rode him daily, exploring new trails, teaching children, and inspiring the townspeople. She faced challenges, learned from them, and grew stronger with each experience. Shadow, too, thrived under her care, becoming more confident, responsive, and spirited. Together, they became a living example of what could be achieved when trust, patience, and courage came together. Even the most skeptical townspeople could no longer deny her skill and bravery. They had called her wild, reckless, and untamed, but now they saw her for what she truly was, a girl with courage, heart, and the ability to connect with the world in ways that many could not. Her wildness had become her strength, her freedom, and her gift to those around her. And through it all, Tom continued to watch quietly, proud of the girl he had recognized long ago. He had given her a horse, yes, but what she had given herself, and what she had given Shadow, was far greater. She had discovered her true spirit, her ability to lead, to inspire, and to trust. And in doing so, she had changed not only her own life, but also the lives of everyone who witnessed her courage. As the sun set each evening, casting long shadows across the fields, Naya would ride Shadow to the top of the hills, feeling the wind in her hair and the rhythm of his hooves beneath her. She felt alive, free, and unstoppable. The Apache girl, once called too wild, had found her place in the world, not by conforming, but by embracing the very spirit that made her different. The early morning air was crisp and still, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sun-warmed earth. Naya stood at the edge of the paddock, brushing Shadow's sleek black coat. The bond between them had grown deeper with each passing day. What had started as a cautious meeting had transformed into a partnership built on trust, understanding, and mutual respect. Shadow had become more than a horse to Naya. He was a true companion, a mirror of her courage, and a friend who responded to her every move. The town had changed too. The same people who had once whispered about the Apache girl were now watching her in awe. Children followed her with admiration, trying to mimic her movements and learning the lessons she had discovered about patience, courage, and trust. Even the adults had begun to recognize her skill and determination. Some still called her wild, but now it was said with respect rather than fear. Her wildness was no longer something dangerous. It was a gift, a proof of her strength and heart. That morning, Naya had decided to ride further than ever before. She wanted to explore the hills that stretched beyond the river past the winding trails she had already mastered. She had ridden Shadow through thick forests, rocky paths, and gentle meadows, but the farther trails had always called to her like a challenge waiting to be conquered. Today, she felt ready. She mounted Shadow with calm confidence, adjusting the saddle and reins with ease, and whispered softly to him. Shadow nickered in response, and together they set off. As they rode, the wind rushed past them, carrying with it the scents of pine, grass, and earth. Shadow moved with power and grace, his hooves striking the ground rhythmically. Naya leaned forward, letting her body move with him, her heart beating in time with his stride. Every step strengthened their bond. She could feel Shadow's moods, his hesitation, and his excitement. She guided him gently when the path narrowed, whispered encouragement when he hesitated, and let him enjoy the open stretches where he could run freely. Halfway through the journey, they reached a part of the hills that were steep and jagged.
A small landslide had created a narrow path along the ridge, and the drop below was sharp and unforgiving. Naya took a deep breath and whispered to Shadow, urging him carefully along the path.
He moved slowly, testing each step, but he trusted her. She felt her heart race, but her mind was calm. Every movement, every shift in her balance, guided him safely. At that moment, Naya realized that riding Shadow was not just about physical skill. It was about trust, communication, and courage. When they reached the top of the ridge, Naya dismounted and looked out over the valley below. The view was breathtaking. The town was far in the distance, the river glinting in the morning sun, the fields stretching endlessly, and the mountains rising proudly beyond the horizon. She felt a thrill of freedom unlike anything she had ever known. For the first time, she understood why her spirit had always been considered wild. It was because it could not be contained. It belonged to the wind, the hills, and the open plains. As she stood there, Shadow nuzzled her gently, and she laughed softly. "We did it," she whispered. "We made it together." It was not just a ride. It was a triumph, a proof of the bond between them, and a testament to her courage. The journey back was filled with quiet satisfaction. Naya rode with ease, guiding Shadow along trails they had never traveled before. Each twist and turn, each hill and stream, strengthened their connection. When they returned to the ranch, Tom was waiting, leaning against the fence with his hands folded. His eyes held pride and warmth as he watched Naya dismount. "You've grown so much," he said quietly. "You and Shadow, you've become more than I imagined." Naya smiled, brushing Shadow's mane. "I couldn't have done it without him," she said, "and without you too. You gave me a chance I didn't even know I needed." Tom shook his head. "No, Naya. You gave yourself the chance. I just provided a path." The days that followed saw Naya taking more townspeople on short rides. Children eagerly joined her in the fields, learning the basics of horse riding under her gentle guidance. Adults, who had once whispered about her recklessness, now watched quietly, nodding in respect. They realized that her wild spirit was not something to fear. It was something to admire. Her courage, patience, and ability to connect with Shadow had transformed their perception of her entirely. But even as admiration grew, Naya's spirit remained untamed. She did not let respect make her cautious or restrained. Instead, it encouraged her to push further, to explore more, and to teach others the lessons she had learned. Every ride became an opportunity for growth, for herself, for Shadow, and for the people who were starting to believe in her. One afternoon, a sudden challenge arose. While riding along a trail near the river, Shadow spooked at a sudden movement in the bushes. He bolted, almost knocking Naya off balance. Her heart raced, but she remembered all the lessons she had learned. She stayed calm, whispered softly, and guided him gently back to the path. Shadow slowed, trusting her guidance. Naya felt a wave of pride. She had faced fear, stayed composed, and emerged stronger. This experience reinforced her confidence and strengthened her bond with Shadow. She realized that challenges were not obstacles, they were opportunities to prove the depth of their connection. And with each challenge they overcame together, their partnership grew stronger, unbreakable. News of Naya's ride spread beyond the town. People from neighboring areas came to see the Apache girl and her remarkable horse. They watched as she guided Shadow across fields, through rivers and along steep trails. Children and adults alike were inspired by her courage, skill, and kindness. The girl who had once been considered too wild was now a symbol of strength, freedom, and determination. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Naya rode Shadow to the top of her favorite hill. The sky was ablaze with colors, orange, pink, and purple blending together. She sat there, feeling the wind in her hair, the rhythm of Shadow's breathing beneath her, and a deep sense of peace. She had come far, from being judged and misunderstood to being respected and admired. But more importantly, she had found freedom, companionship, and a place where her spirit could soar without limits. Tom joined her on the hill, leaning against the fence quietly. "You've done something extraordinary," he said softly. "You've shown everyone that being wild isn't a weakness. It's a gift." Naya smiled, stroking Shadow's neck. "I just followed my heart," she said. "And Shadow?" He helped me see it clearly. Tom nodded. "And in doing so, you've helped others see too." From that day on, Naya continued to ride Shadow daily, exploring new trails, teaching children, and inspiring the town. She faced challenges with courage, embraced freedom with joy, and nurtured the bond with Shadow with love and patience. She had become more than just the Apache girl. She had become a symbol of what could happen when courage, trust, and determination were combined. The townspeople no longer whispered about her recklessness. Instead, they told stories of her bravery, her kindness, and her remarkable partnership with Shadow. Children tried to follow in her footsteps, inspired by her example. Adults admired her confidence and her ability to remain true to herself, no matter what others said. And through it all, Tom remained quietly proud. He had seen Naya grow from a misunderstood girl into a confident, skilled rider and a compassionate teacher. He had witnessed the power of trust, patience, and encouragement. And he had learned once again that sometimes the right opportunity can change lives, not just for the one who receives it, but for everyone who witnesses it. As the years passed, Naya and Shadow's bond remained unbroken. They continued to explore the open lands, face new challenges, and teach others the lessons they had learned together. Naya never lost her wild spirit. It had become her strength, her freedom, and her gift to the world. And Shadow remained her loyal companion, a partner who mirrored her courage, her determination, and her heart. The story of the Apache girl who was once called too wild spread far and wide, not as a tale of recklessness, but as a story of courage, trust, and the extraordinary bond between a girl and her horse. And at the center of it all, Naya rode freely across the hills, the wind in her hair, Shadow at her side, and the knowledge that she had finally found her place in the world, a place where her spirit could soar, unbound and unstoppable.